So this is interviewee Ansel Wong, interviewer Zahra Dalilah on the 16th of February 2017 at Goldsmiths University, interviewing on the GLC story. First of all, could you describe your entrance into politics, how you became politicized when you were younger? Kind of what was your background? What were you up to?
I think my country of birth was Trinidad and Tobago, and my political awareness grew out of the politics of that country leading towards independence. So it was based and rooted within an anti-colonial dialectic, so that growing up as a young child, you were able to participate in a lot of the discourses and the discussions and the politicizing that was going around, a drive for independence from Britain. And so that my political awareness grew out of that dialogue, listening to politicians, listening to analysts, listening to people like that. And a key mentor in that was Dr. Eric Williams, the author of Capitalism and Slavery, because he spoke very intelligently and movingly about aspects of that history, putting it within the context of the freedom from enslavement, freedom from colonialism. And as a young child, you grew up in that environment, running around listening to some of these things, and some of the buzzwords that help to sort of formulate in your mind a position. So for me, for example, when Eric Williams spoke about Massa Day Done, which is the dominance of the master, the dominance of the plantation owner is finished, something like that resonated in your mind as a child, Massa Day Done. And that remained and resonated with me very clearly. And then the other one was, we are talking, when we gain independence, he said, we are talking about Mother Trinidad and Tobago, not Mother India, not Mother Africa. So immediately he placed with us, even though our heritage or roots was from Africa and India, where we are now in that country, that's our mother, that's our roots, that's our heritage.
Okay, thank you. And could you talk about the journey from Trinidad and Tobago to finding yourself in the UK, your background in terms of studying, where you live, where you grew up?
Well, most people, primary and secondary education you undertook within the countries, the colonies at the time, or the independent nations. Our education system was geared towards tertiary education, either in the country of the mother country, which is the United Kingdom, or you would go abroad to Canada or the United States, either as part of a scholarship program or a developmental program. So natural progression, educational progression, was to a UK university, not a red brick university, but it had to be a major university. And we had a system of examination leading to what is called a scholarship exam, so that scholarship exam entitled you to Oxbridge. And everybody competed in the whole island, competed for that one or two places at Oxbridge. And if you didn't get that, you were considered a failure. So my progression was to try something, and I came fourth in the overall scholarship papers. So I didn't get into Oxbridge. So I had no alternative but to look at an alternative, red brick, And I got into Hull to read English and American Studies, because English was my particular subject, which was a big disappointment for my family, big disappointment everybody, leaving Trinidad all the way to go to a flipping red brick university called Hull in Yorkshire. Nobody knew where it is, what it is about. But nevertheless, you're moving away from your country to migrate there. At the same time, my family had migrated as a result of the pull factors of economy and advancement. So there were push and pull factors moving people from one part of the Caribbean to the next, or from West Africa to the next. I was pushed in terms of the educational input and progression. The rest of my family was pulled because they needed labor to oil the British economy. So both generations, both constituency coalesced in London. So my sisters and some of my brothers came over for those reasons, and I came over for other reasons. So from that, within that kind of dialectic, within that dimension, there was little tensions as well. And the tensions also exist between those who didn't choose to go to United Kingdom, but chose to go to Canada and USA. And the fact that what happened in terms of the ones who went to Canada, the one who went to the UK, their successes, financial successes and academic successes were very different from what happened in the UK. Within Trinidad and Tobago, a degree from the UK automatically entitled you to certain benefits. A degree from USA or Canada, even if it's from Harvard or even if it's from any of the Ivy League universities, still didn't match a degree from even a red brick university in the United Kingdom. So there was a value system in those sort of movements. So those are some of the factors that pushed me into there and placed us in a particular position in the United Kingdom society. So I arrived in Hull in 1965, go straight to Hull University in Yorkshire, studying English and American Studies. There I met other Caribbean people, mostly people from Trinidad and Tobago, and from other islands, and from other colonies of Britain and other countries. And that in itself was an interesting experience, because we came in as black students within UK society, and there were certain notions, there were certain expectations, there were certain stereotypes that they had of us. And I think that is best illustrated by the fact that the British Council in this UK were looking after the welfare of us as foreign students, as students from the Commonwealth. And their notion of what we need to do to integrate into British society was very much based on this kind of stereotypical, kind of racist perception of us. So, for example, part of our induction at the university was to show us how to flush the toilet. Part of the induction was to show us how to use a knife and fork, because there was a perception that we didn't know how to do these things. As Trinidadians, we found that really laughable, and we did it and we laughed among ourselves and talked among ourselves about how stupid this is, but we still went through the process, laughing and to ourselves and afterwards that how ignorant these people are. So that was the kind of environment at the university level that you had to deal with in terms of those perceptions. Obviously, there are other perceptions, like we were very good at cricket, or we were very good at playing music. And that, in a sense, also was true to a certain extent. So that, for example, in terms of cricket, we all played cricket, we all knew how to play cricket, but we never joined the university teams. This is the issue, because we just didn't have that, probably, I don't know, the discipline or whatever it is, to buy whites and to buy net things and so on to be able to play cricket. But when the university asked of us to play, we had a team, British Council team, and we played the university second team and defeated them badly because we had fast bowlers and people bowling in their normal shoes and all sort of things and wearing all different colours. But for us, it was a fun game. But the university took it very seriously, and they were defeated, and they felt we were not being loyal because we had these skills, but yet we weren't willing to participate and represent the university. But for us, cricket was a fun game, and we wanted to do it in our own time, and we enjoyed that. So that put us in conflict, in a sense, with the university, that reinforced our separateness from the university itself. That was also codified by the fact that we were black, or by the fact we were from different countries. Yeah. Out of that, I got involved in radical politics. We had the Radical Student Alliance, which was the RSA was the left wing of student politics. The nutters, as they said, in terms of radicalism and Marxism. And I naturally progressed towards involvement in that, and my friends were also involved in that. It was around May 65 to 67 or thereabouts, when there were a lot of things happening in Paris and the Vietnam War and so on. So we were very heavily involved in activism and political action within the university and within Hull as a city. So as black students, we became part and parcel of that. We had our own organizations. We had the Caribbean Society, and that was a basis that gives us an opportunity to feel at home with our culture and so on. And it was open to everybody. So the opportunity for people to enjoy themselves or within a Caribbean milieu and experience something of that kind of aspect. It was good in Hull because we had a professor who was an expert in Caribbean literature. So there was always a predisposition towards welcoming anything that was Caribbean. So that would enable us to happen. But the activism continued. We did a lot of work. We twinned with Haiphong in Vietnam. We raised money for ambulances to buy ambulances and send them to Vietnam for the Viet Cong. And we like Paris, when Paris erupted, we too erupted, took over the university, and expelled all of the Senate and everybody, and we elected a new Senate of 5 students who became the senators of the university. I was one of the 5 elected as a senator. Then we negotiated to have a parallel structure in terms of the management of the university, that students have become represented on the Senate. And 5 of us, together with the University Senate, became the governing body for the university. So that radicalism and that approach towards revolution and what we thought was being left-wing manifested itself around that whole period when the Vietnam War was kind of generating a lot of support among students. And then coming down from university to London during the break time, whenever there was a summer break or mid-term break, it was very easy for us to drive down to London and join the urban elite in London, all the other London students who probably had a much more, we looked up to actually, because London was a kind of centre. And we did our thing in Hull, we did our thing in Leeds, and we linked up in the north. But when you get down to London, it was a different thing altogether, because for the first time you were engaging with a community, not university students. It was a community of people, of ordinary people, and that was quite an eye-opener, because that meant to say that we didn't see ourselves as a kind of elite, as academics, university graduates and so on. We were engaging very much with that second and third generation young black community. And the best example of that is around the West Indian Student Centre in Earls Court. That was a centre that was a central communal place for all Caribbean students, paid for by the Caribbean governments. So each government contributed to maintain this building. It's a very big building in Earls Court. And there you would go, there was a library, there was dinner, we had a 3-course dinner for 16p, there was a bar. This is 1965 to 68, that's 69, 70 and so on. So, but it was an opportunity to do that. And it's a place where you can go and sit down, you can read books, you got newspapers from the Caribbean was there, you have a library where you can go and study, quiet study, you had a billiards room, you had showers and everything. So it was a nice little student centre. Next door to it was a West African centre where the West African students were involved. So there was this kind of student kind of orientated politics. At the same time, bubbling all of that was what was happening in the black communities across London. And those people were agitating to get involved in what they see as this prestigious place, middle-class students from the Caribbean enjoying themselves and all the facilities, and they not getting the opportunity to do so. Our politics, of a populist nature, wanted us to bring these young people in, so and bring the community in, so the community would engage with students. I was involved with the Union of West Indian Students, which is the West Indian Students Union. And the Union of West Indian Students was a national, international body across the whole world. And West Indian Students Union was a UK branch. Both branches, myself and Tony Martin, who became Professor Tony Martin, who is one of the foremost scholars on Marcus Garvey. We both managed and ran those two organizations. So we developed quite a lot of work within that center to politicize our young people and to begin to address the issues of black people in the United Kingdom, black people in London, which before, as students, we weren't particularly au fait with, because we were looking at it as a global issue across the world, not through what was happening locally. And that is where activism came out. A lot of things happened in that center. The center became a focal of political activity to such an extent that the government threatened to cut off funding if we don't stop and introduce measures to stop the community coming in. And that battle went on until in the end the governments, all the Caribbean governments, because they all were contributing. The British Caribbean governments, yes, they were all contributing at different levels, like the United Nations. They all have a percentage how much they would contribute, and they all decided that when prime ministers came, when ministers came on tours or visits or whatever it is, they would come to address the students. But while addressing the students, there would be very discordant elements within there, shouting them down and carrying on. There was a place where radicals came. So after Tommy Lee and all of those people who did the Black Power salute at the Olympics, when they passed through London, they came there to address the students. So we invited them to come and address the students. That was seen as not the remit of this centre. We shouldn't be engaging in those sort of politics and so on. Michael X would come, visit the centre. All the radical movements would be there. The Caribbean artist movement would have meetings there regularly. And these are Caribbean writers, Andrew Solke, John Rose, Eddie Braithwaite, everybody coming to London and meeting as Caribbean artists in exile, writing as writers. So all of this was a hub of political activity. And I was the chairman of the House Committee that ran that centre, also the vice chair of the Union of West Indian Students Unions across the world there. So I became very much enmeshed into that. And then we started to do things also of a radical nature. And two examples. One was the creation of a black supplementary school. And we call it the CLR James Supplementary School. CLR James agreed. He wrote to me. I asked him, and he said, "Yes, call it by my name." And we set up that at the school to teach English basic skills and black politics and culture and so on to young people. Then the second one was the creation of an arts group called the Black Arts Workshop. And the idea was to look at black art, black performance, black theatre. At that time, in America, people like Amir Baraka, Leroy Jones, and Essence Magazine, and all of those radical black things, the black aesthetic was being promoted by Ed Bullins and other people like him. And we embraced all of that, Black is Beautiful movement. And that workshop was an opportunity for people who were creative, poets, writers, dancers, everybody coming together as young first and second generation black people, and opportunity to perform their art and their craft. Linked to that also were other groups at the same time. The Black United and Freedom Party in London, New Cross around here, the Fasimbas, which is another theatre performing group, black theatre group. And we were the two main proponents of black art and black culture, the Black Arts Workshop and the Fasimbas. And sometimes we joined together to put on shows, all within this idea of revolution and taking the art and looking at art in a different perspective and creating what we then call a black aesthetic. So that black is beautiful, yes, and therefore the beauty is determined not by European characteristics or European norms or metaphors or language or anything like that. We are creating their own idea of what it is that we can call beautiful, what it is that we call excellent, that appeals and relate to our culture, our background, our history, our heritage. Sorry, I'm going on too long.
So I'm just going to ask you actually to move the mic onto the other side.
Yeah.
Could you?
Yeah, can you hear me now? Does that better?
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, that's perfect. So after you left university, what was your career progression after that?
Left university in 1968 and then came down to London and decided that because again my family had been settled in, the ones went to Canada, ones went to USA, the ones who remained in the United Kingdom, so there was no real wish then to return, which would have been the original idea, that to come to university, do your degree, go back home and teach or do whatever it is. But I decided then to stay on, do a postgraduate certificate in education, which at the time was called Education in Tropical Areas. It was just a pseudonym at the London Institute of Education for teaching English as a second language, which that was the words used later on. But in those days, in 1968, 69, 70, this had this notion of education in tropical areas. And it's the same thing like second language teaching. So that was my specialism, and I did that, and I got my postgraduate certificate in education. Did a teaching practice at Sydenham Girls' School in New Cross, Forest Hill, and decided, well, look, this is it. I was offered a post at Sydenham and decided to take it. So therefore, in one fell swoop, my life then said, this is it. I'm grounded here in the United Kingdom, I'm grounded here in London, and my career was within that decision. So I then started to get involved in other things and other activities, which included developing the Black Arts Workshop, as I referred to earlier, and also involving in a political organization called the Black Liberation Front, which was one of few black organizations like the Black Panthers, Black Liberation Front, Black United and Freedom Party, and so on. And we all were developing approaches that were trying to introduce programs of resistance, programs of rebellion, programs of saying no more, and campaigning against certain things, campaigning against the sus laws, campaigning against police brutality, campaigning against inability to enter into nightclubs, and so on. Wherever there were opportunities, wherever the things happened, we suddenly coalesced as a community and joined that particular campaign, whether it's the Mangrove Restaurant in West London, whether it's the Oval 4, where the 4 people who were arrested and beaten up by the police in an Oval Station, or whether it's around direct activism of certain individuals, or say, for example, around the siege, Spaghetti House siege, which is a Spaghetti House in Knightsbridge, is a spaghetti house, and some of our young people went in there to rob it, and it went wrong, and they took the hostages in there, and they belonged to our organization, the Black Liberation Front. Well, at least 2 of them belonged to the organization. One was a criminal, but and that again placed us into direct limelight, because in some instances we've been very romantic about revolution, very romantic about what we want to achieve, without realizing what is the real implications of what we are saying ought to happen in terms of bringing a radical approach towards religion. So for me, while I was at university, I struggled with a liberation theology in terms of my faith as a Catholic, coming to this country to become a Jesuit priest, and therefore having difficulties accepting the dogma of Catholicism, but then being attracted by the liberation theologists of Latin America, who saw religion in a different matter, or the Pablo Freire in terms of his liberation ideas about education, so that education is not necessarily a banking concept, it's a different concept of how you acquire knowledge and acquire experiences. So all of these things are beginning to influence my thoughts, and because you dabbled with it, as well as the personal struggles you went through, because my parents would be very upset that I suddenly lost my faith and no longer going to the church. But that was the reality. I came here and I struggled. I went into to live into the chaplaincy, the Roman Catholic chaplaincy, to try and retrieve my faith and try to see what else I can do. I couldn't. There's no way I can do that. My mother had to eventually accept that that's the way I am. So this change continued. All the kind of influences coming onto you as you move in and getting involved. Then there's a political aspect of the political struggles around campaigns, around things that were happening in the community in London. Then there was the issues around trying to organize yourself into an organization, replicated along the lines of the American Black Power movement as well, and developing self-help initiatives, which led to the development and the creation of Ujima Housing Association, which we developed, which is the largest black housing association in the UK. And we started very simply around squatting and around capturing what we call capturing properties. So you would see and look around your community. If there's an empty property, nobody's there, you break in, you tidy it up, you paint, you fix this all that, and you bring in the young people who were getting more and more. There was more and more homelessness among our young people, and they would stay there for a month, 2 months, a year, and then you move them on. So there's lots of properties in London that were free. So we have a van and we will drive around, and we have people who are plumbers, we have people who are painters, people who can do different things. So we break into those buildings and wait until they take us to court or the police come and turf us out. So it's very much like the squatting movement at the time. So what we concentrate on black young people who, because increasingly we were having homelessness as they were growing up, they were in conflict with their parents. Parents felt, right, you can't behave like you were doing, out. They chucked them out. We picked them up. Then there was a question about our girls getting pregnant. And increasingly becoming getting pregnant and having parents, single parenthood, nowhere to go. And we had to find solutions to these, because this is our community. You can't take a moral attitude towards it. Don't get pregnant. Yes, you can say something. Yes, don't protect yourself. Sex protection. But if you get pregnant, we've got to find a way of dealing with it. So we established hostels for our girls, young girls who either got pregnant or got chucked out and weren't getting pregnant, but we had to do that. So I was a warden of one of those hostels in Ladbroke Grove, and we had about 15 rooms, and each girl would be in one room. My wife and I had that responsibility to look after them, to nurture them, to show them the issues, and make sure, basically, don't get pregnant. That's the message. And they had a subsidized rent in there, and the idea was to then move them from there into permanent accommodation. So programs like that were part of our educational strategy to deal with the black presence in this country. So we established Operation Head Start, which is a program to build on that. So we had a bookshop, Head Start Books and Crafts, in West Green Road in Tottenham, Seven Sisters, and that provided some of the entrepreneurial resources that we needed to carry out our projects. So we did all of that, yeah. And I played a pivotal role in developing with others some of these things. So teaching at the same time, and teaching I started teaching on mostly girls' school, because that was my main concern, because what I was seeing among our young girls was very troubling and very worrying, and he wanted to tackle that. So I took that particular choice. Plus, I found it easier to teach girls and to get that kind of respect and to be able to drive them and create the motivation that they needed for education, for their educational success. And that was very powerful.
And so this is the work that you did on the side was the Black Liberation Front, and other than that you were working in schools?
Schools, the teacher, as an English teacher, yes.
Okay, and what, how did you come from being an English teacher to working with the GLC?
Right. From an English teacher teaching at Sydenham, I soon realized that I wasn't able to directly engage with the girls because I was one of the few teachers with a degree in English, and therefore they were putting me to teach school at the higher, streaming, the highest streams, O-level, A-levels, and so on. And all the other girls that I wanted to teach were the lower streams, I wasn't accessing them. I decided then to get involved by providing opportunities for them to meet. So lunchtime, they would collect their money, 18p, whatever it is. We collect the money and they go so much. I send two of them down to Brixton Market to buy food. They bring it back, they cook, and we eat. We have lunch. So instead of having a school lunch, so we had that kind of opportunity. It's a Caribbean club, the girls. But then they felt that it had to be widened. It should be all girls. So we call it the Fourth World Club, Women as a Fourth World, an opportunity to create that kind of things. So I decided that I can move out of that, and when I was offered the opportunity to develop a community education project in Brixton, I decided to do that. And there is why I set up the Afroway School, which is the first black supplementary school that was funded by the Inner London Education Authority. And that school, again, was a full-time school aimed at young people who were truant in the head or truant with the feet from the education system. I did outreach work with those local schools in Lambeth, Norwood Girls, Dick Shepherd, Vauxhall Manor, some work with Tulse Hill Boys, and so on. So we worked very much around that, and therefore the opportunity existed for a positive intervention in the lives of these young people, because you were giving them some positive opportunities to deal with the whole issues of underachievement and poor self-images. So from there, I was rooted in social engineering, social work, to make sure that these things happen. So it was a natural progression from there into local authority work and social work, because from there I went and involved myself in the development of Elimu Community School, what we call a community, linking up community and university. And Elimu is Swahili for knowledge or education. And the idea is that we will provide community knowledge and community education for people who were there. Ken Livingstone became mayor of London, and he decided to recruit a team around him for his own agenda, and I was encouraged to become part of that team. He set up an Ethnic Minorities Unit within the Greater London Council, headed by Herman Ousley, who is now Lord Ousley, and Herman asked me to come and be his deputy, and that's how I went into the Greater London Council, because we had an agenda. We had to support Ken for his left-wing agenda to deliver it, because the problem he had was to deal with all the bureaucrats and officers in the GLC who are careerists. We came in as political activists. We came in on the basis that we're going to change this organization because we are subscribing to the agenda that Ken has brought in. And we were put in there for that purpose. Yeah. So for the first time, I had a status of a very senior officer at one of the top levels within Greater London. Have had very little experience of senior management at that time, but very clear in my head what my politics were in terms of community engagement, community empowerment, and in terms of using the resources right across London.
And sorry, what year are we in?
This was, God, I finished 68, 72. It's around the late 70s, yes. 80s, beginning of the 1980s, yeah.
Okay, so just to kind of get a sense of the political atmosphere at the time, so you had Margaret Thatcher elected in 79, and then the GLC became, was
abolished,
much a couple of years after that. So what was kind of your memory of those key events, like when Thatcher got elected, when Ken came in, and?
Well, I mean, once Ken came into power, as I said, we were brought in with a specific agenda to do that, and we started to develop programs to make changes within local government. For example, we tackled the fire brigade as a uniform service, because that we had responsibility for that at the fire brigade, so that there weren't any black firefighters. So we decided that we needed to tackle that agenda in terms of ensuring that diversity and equality is incorporated. Part of that struggle was to tackle the issue around selection procedures and testing, what sort of testing they'd use, personality testing and so on, which was very much skewed against black people. And we looked at that, and we got buy-in from the other members to change all of that, so that enable that when a black person applied, there was this opportunity for that black person to be as successful as anybody else, because the tests that you were asked to do didn't discriminate against you. So there was things like that. There are things around economic development that we wanted to look at, how we empower through venture funding and different aspects of economic development, access to buildings and so on.
Venture funding?
Startup funds, yes, to enable a business person to use startup funds to start their own businesses. Around the issues around race, because there was a Ethnic Minorities Unit, there was a women's unit, there was a police unit, yeah. And these were the three main, and just obviously economic development, arts and so on. But these were the three mainly political units who were there to try and force that agenda, working in partnership with economic development, working in partnership with the arts, with responsibility for the South Bank and the programming of the South Bank, for example, where black people and black arts weren't given an opportunity to use these prestigious venues. So us, as the Ethnic Minorities Unit, had to remit right across the GLC to make sure that elements of their delivery of their services didn't discriminate against black people, or did not, in fact, fail to represent those cultures. So, and plus the fact that we develop our own programs. So we would have concerts, we would have events, and we have commemorations. So we introduced this anti-racist year, which would be a celebration. We had the money to enable us to do that, because we use local authority, Section 137, I think it was, of the Local Government Act, which would enable us to have a penny out of whatever it was to generate the funding for those kind of projects. And that led to us launching this anti-racist year throughout the whole of Greater London, because you're talking about every borough, 32 boroughs, London boroughs, all embracing and participating in that. So immediately the gender race became high on the agenda, because it was being taken at that level by Ken Livingstone GLC. And that out of that came African Jubilee Year, this commemoration of the organization African Unity, the celebration of emancipation and so on. And then out of that came Black History Month, because it was part and parcel of that. So there were initiatives over the years that was building up to be able to say to Londoners, this has to be a multiracial, multicultural, multi-ethnic society, and therefore as leaders at that level, we are going to be creating programs to reflect that multi-ethnicity and multiculturalism there.
And before Ken Livingstone, what was the agenda of the GLC? How did that differ?
I think before then, I wasn't involved as an employee before then. I was involved outside. My only involvement as an employee became when Ken got elected, and he brought us into the GLC. So I was new to the GLC as an officer, as an employee. Prior to that, it was very much the echelon of white power and the top end of the scale, because you had Greater London Council, and then you have the local authorities, and then you have the Inner London Education Authority. At each of those levels, there were struggles going on with the community. So with the ILEA, there were elements in terms of issues around achievement, issues of underachievement, and identity. So they developed in their own way a multi-ethnic inspectorate, which included, again, people like myself not me personally, but people like myself at that level who were teachers, who were given the opportunity to become inspectors and to drive the agenda for race, class in the London Education Authority. So from the ILEA, there was that things happening, but within the GLC, there was very little evidence of any change before Ken Livingstone. There was an idea that you're delivering services, and the delivery of the services was efficient, and we didn't have to take in account any needs or special needs in terms of ethnicity or race, perhaps in terms of class, but not in terms of race communities. So there was a kind of colorblind approach towards the delivery of services, and this is when Ken came in and made race, ethnicity, gender, disability, and economic status key indicators that would influence policy development and programs. Then all of that changed.
Were there any other kind of major political events in the lead up to Ken Livingstone's takeover that marked the sort of atmosphere at the time?
Well, there was the ongoing issues around SUS law, vagrancy laws, the police arresting people on the streets on suspicion of being a footpad or things. There was somebody who steals. Was called. You had the phrase called immigrant footpad. That was muggers. Yes. The idea behind a footpad is in the old English parlance is somebody who steals from you and run away. Footpad, yes. So there was this idea that a lot of the mugging and the street crime was generated by black young people. There was that issue, and therefore any black person was susceptible to being stopped and searched by the police because of that basic suspicion. And that meant it brought young people directly into conflict with the police, and there were high levels of arrests and so on. There were issues around what is happening in our schools, where issues around poor self-image, issues around educationally being labelled educationally subnormal, ESN, and then being placed into special schools. There were issues around, for us as black parents of my generation and the generation before me, who saw special education as special, not negative, because from the Caribbean, from Africa, West Africa, if you give something special, it is special and it's different, better. But within the English context, special education meant you were separate because you were not within the norm. So educationally subnormal and special schools became the dumping ground for black students. That was a battle that had been waged. Organizations were being formed. The black teachers were coming together as one body. There was a growth in the development of black studies, particularly in primary school. So there was a Teachers Against Racism, TAR, which was a major body fighting for that multiculturalism. And it was another organization, National NAME, National Association for Multi-Ethnic Education. So again, radical teachers, black teachers coming together. So there was organizing at all these different fractured points in the society, where people took it into their hands to bring people of like mind together to campaign for change, or to initiate change, or to show what alternatives may exist. So all of that was happening outside the GLC, but little change. Apart from the ILEA in the London Education Authority, there was very little change at that institutional level.
And so you've mentioned quite a few things that you did while you were at the GLC. What were your proudest moments of that time?
Good question. I think what I remember very distinctly is with abolition. because we know abolition was coming. We were in County Hall, and just across the road in the Houses of Parliament, they were debating things. And during that period of debate, when the bill was going through, there was a hive of activity going on. And we were planning, strategizing on the basis of what was happening in Parliament. And it meant immediate action, and for me it was direct engagement in community politics. So, for example, we would have people on motorbikes ready to move into different directions, to do things based on whatever was happening in Parliament. So if there was a particular clause, it meant that we had to shift resources from the GLC into these organizations, creating these organizations, and then being able to shift money there, because once we get abolished, we're going to be able to continue to exist and to fight Thatcher. And it meant creating organizations that would be in the receipt of this money, and it meant people on bikes going straight down to company's house and filing companies, us as officers, senior officers, signing documents as directors of this company or directors of that company, so we can shift. So there was that kind of buzz of activism that was really, really good, and it was a heightened buzz, and the opportunity to say, well, we got 1 year, we got 6 months, let's see what we can do. What are the legacies that we can leave behind to do that? One of the legacies obviously was a successor authority, to create successor authorities, because once we got abolished, we could only depend on the Labour-controlled authorities. We couldn't have controlled the Conservative-controlled. So therefore, we had to look at what do we achieve by keeping some of these structures, so that in the end, us as staff were transferred onto what is called successor authorities. So it's like the London Borough of Camden became the lead body for these successor authorities. So we were transferred onto the payroll of Camden, because by that time we had shifted money onto Camden to pay for our salaries, and we began to work for Camden, and then gradually dissipated throughout Labour-controlled boroughs. Yeah. So that for me was I felt that kind of excitement of creating something. Concomitant to that is the biggest sense of disappointment in what we didn't leave behind, and which we could have left behind, and that was property. As community organizations, we didn't own any property. We couldn't allow organizations to buy property and own the freehold. They could only rent it. So that meant that even though we were helping organizations to develop, in the end, they didn't own anything. And I felt we could have found a way of transferring ownership, so that when a GLC died, that community organization would continue to exist, because they had a building, they had a church, they had a gurdwara, they had a community center, they had a youth center that they owned. That was theirs. We weren't able to do that.
And how long were you at the GLC in total? I
think, I can't remember the number of years, but I was there until from Ken's coming into power to abolition. Okay. Yeah. The first year he came into power, yes. Yeah.
And just talking a little bit more about the GLC as an institution, could you describe how what the remit of the council, the Greater London Council, was?
Well, the remit was the government for London. I mean, that's clearly with certain limitations, because central government still continued. They could make taxes, set governments, and so on. But the government for London, within its limitations, operated as a second tier of government. Yeah. Obviously, they can't raise their own taxes, they can't raise their own money, there is all dependent on money from central government. And within those limitations, they had to develop policies and practices that would deliver for Londoners. And it meant also delivering across all political spectrums, because not all London authorities, local authorities, were Labour, not all were Conservative. It was a mixture. So therefore, you have to work together to bring about an understanding and support for those projects that would have widespread support. Otherwise, you wouldn't get it through the various committees, it wouldn't become policy, funding would not be allocated, and then you're back to square one, yes. So it was a bureaucratic environment, a bureaucratic institution, dependent very much on the allocation of resources from central government.
And how did that interplay play out between the sort of party politics element and then the local politics?
Well, I mean, I think different elements were very dependent on which party was in power, who held sway at County Hall. Key elements was in housing, because housing was very important feature. So the opportunity for a particular borough to benefit from social housing, benefit from grants, and enable that to happen was very much dependent on who was in overall control of the Greater London Council. So those are some areas. Then there's the management open spaces, parks, and so on. And there is also specific initiatives that sometimes were unique to a particular part of London. What, in theory, there was this idea of a strategic overview of the whole area in terms of physical geography. So you look across London, because the idea of having a strategic authority, you look at it as just London, not the 32 boroughs. So when you're looking at open spaces, when you're looking at parks, when you're looking at housing, you're taking that overall picture. But that overall picture had to be mediated by people who had different political allegiances, people who had different political positions, people who have different agendas. And it is the discussion and the debate in County Hall around those, the negotiating and the mediation in terms of allocation of resources and quid pro quo of that discussions. Yeah. So it's like a mini parliament. Yeah. Things happened. There were ministers responsible for that. There was chief officers, heads of departments. And at the top of that was the Director General, who had the ultimate power in terms of day-to-day management. Of course, the leader of the council is the leader of the politicians, and then the DG, Director General, is the one that delivers. Yeah.
So in terms of decision making, then was there much? How did that work? Was there?
There was the council, which is of all the members of the Greater London Council has been elected, and then within that there are committees. There's finance and general purposes, there's architectures, and again different delivery and different services. So it will be the arts, architecture, housing, economic development, and with Ken he brought in these units under the Director General's responsibility in terms of equality, which is gender, police, and so on. Yes. So each committee had responsibility and had a budget for producing whatever is the manifesto commitment of that governing the main party who is in power, and of course that has to be put against the opposition, who would fight against that if they think it isn't in the interest of all Londoners. So it was always trying to find a median way without upsetting too many people, because otherwise you're not going to get through unless you had a very good majority in place, which would enable you that whatever you put to that committee would get through, because you had a whip who would create the majority decision. So again, it's a replication of Parliament.
Okay, and the committees were quite effective then in self-determining and being able to have the power to.
In most instances, yes, and interestingly also the opportunity for Londoners to influence that committee by attending meetings, because there always was a public gallery which you were able to attend meetings, so people would come and voice their opinion or petition that particular committee with your own views, either from a local perspective or from a borough-wide perspective or just a community of interest perspective. Yeah.
And what was the relationship like to the civil service at that
time? I'm not sure about that. I mean, I never had really any direct engagement with the civil service. in terms of that, except where there were issues perhaps where we may have overstepped our mark, and people will be vigilant in trying to look at what we're doing. Because all the time when I served as there, we were stretching the boundaries. As we would say to the finance officer, don't tell me I can't do it, tell me how to do it. So, we would want to do something, and the finance person would say, well, you don't have the power to do this. You can only do this with section whatever it is of the Local Government Act, or you can only do this with section. I said, I don't need to know any of that. Tell me which section I need to use to do it. Because then each report that goes to committee has what is called a concurrence. A report by legal, a report by finance, to say, these are the legal implications of what you want him to do. These are the financial implications of what you have. We got the money to do it, or can you use GLC money to do it? Or are you in breach of the law? Are you in breach of regulations? And then those two things are the most important things pre-Ken. After Ken, we introduce a third element, an equality consideration. Not only whether you can do it legally, not only whether you can do it in terms of resources, but what are the implications for equality and diversity? So that each report had a concurrence from us as Ethnic Minorities Unit. So legal, resourcing, budget, financial, equality.
So, in terms of the GLC workplace itself, was the Ethnic Minorities Unit the main point of upholding equality within the workplace, and how was that?
Well, that was the intent. When you create a structure like that, you have a unit outside everything acting as a policeman. But we didn't see ourselves as that, because the idea behind it is that you could never police a bureaucracy that large. It is just physically impossible. You need to have a vast array of staff with each attached. So there were different ways of dealing with it. Do you have what is called advisors within each department reporting to the Ethnic Minorities Unit, or do you have, and what we started off with is that every report had to come to us for looking at to see if it's in breach. Physically, you soon became overwhelmed. There's no way you can go through any report, read all those reports, make judgments about all of them. So the point is that you have to make sure that the people within those departments themselves are committed to equality and anti-racism, and themselves begin to self-monitor the extent to which they as a department will do that. We can provide support, we can provide assistance, we can provide nudging, we can provide political might. If they want to get certain things done and there's restrictions, we can go to the leader or the deputy leader and say, this is what this department requires. So our role was as facilitators as well as policing. Less policing because, to be honest with you, there's no way we had the resources to police effectively. So we have to set by example, look at policies and strategies and set those in terms of equality and diversity, so that then the individual departments will deliver in keeping with those strategies.
So you mentioned already a few of the festivals and the celebrations, and that you kind of led on a lot of the creation of them. What was the impact that you saw of these, both within the institution and across the city?
Well, the whole idea of promoting black art and black culture, or promoting the multicultural nature of London, is to encourage that to happen, to give a platform that is sometimes free and open to any community to exhibit their art. So we funded organizations to do that, to put on these programs, as well as we did our programs ourselves in the Jubilee Gardens or in other GLC parks and recreational areas. So we would invite artists to come and perform, or we would give a grant to an organization to help them to have a local festival or a local event. By branding it as a GLC event, and by giving them the money to do that, you're ensuring that there's a wide representation of the arts and culture of London. and we did that quite effectively. Some of the things we did prestigious because we had responsibility for the South Bank Centre with all the arts, the festival hall and so on. We would work with those the managers there and said, you need to look at your programming, the extent to which your programming and your concerts and so on are reflecting the full range of diverse cultures in London. And that was a very effective role, so that the head of the arts department, we had an arts officer within our unit who would work very closely with the head of that arts department to make sure that that diversity is recognized in their programming, their employment, and in their leadership. Yeah. So we had a number of good festivals. We invited Stevie Wonder. He performed. We did as part of the African Jubilee year a number of very big festivals. We did Tanya Maria, with Nina Simone, with all the sort of black artists and black ballet, Afrique, yeah, and so on, yeah. So we set the example by inviting these people and working with the community to promote these. So one of my particular aspects was promoting the art and culture of people of Indian descent from the Caribbean. Indo-Caribbean communities. So we brought over artists that are representing that, the National Indian Orchestra of Trinidad and Tobago, and Mongol Patisa, who is a famous sitarist, yes, played the sitar, with free concerts throughout London, so people are able to come and access and listen to the music, either in the park or in a town hall.
And yeah, you've also touched on abolition a little bit, but if you could expand a little bit more about kind of those last months and even up to the last night, and what your reaction was to abolition at that time.
Well, once we accepted that we're going to be abolished, once we knew that that's Thatcher's agenda and there's no way we were not going to be abolished, you had to begin to strategize and to develop. At one level, at the personal level, is a question of people who are workers. You've got to look after their welfare because they will be made redundant. Once they get their redundancy, that's fine. But people who come in and work, and because at that time the GLC attracted a lot of community activists who felt that they want to participate. And you came in with that kind of enthusiasm and that energy, and then suddenly you realize, well, I'm going to be out of a job in 6 months. I have to start to look at that. So we, as managers, we had to institute a system to enable people to be redeployed as appropriate, or to get the necessary assistance to get employment elsewhere. So we set up systems and bring in consultants and managers and so on to provide that kind of support. So once you felt that people were being dealt with, nobody, well, as far as you can see, nobody is going to suffer the fact that they're going to be out of a job unless they're taking a decision to not to work or whatever it is. But you did your best to ensure that all your staff would be looked after and had possible redeployment opportunities. Then you began to look at what you can do in terms of leaving a legacy, and what can you do to make sure that this period of nirvana and whatever you want to call it is something that remains positive in people's imagination. And that is when we started to look at alternatives. That is started with looking what was the political consequences of looking at post-abolition. What shall exist? And the creation of successor authorities was developed. So the Ethnic Minorities Unit became the Race and Equality Policy Group, REPG, under Camden. So Camden was then responsible for doing that. To take out as many of our employees from the Ethnic Minorities Unit, transfer them under the control of Camden, paid by Camden Council, under what is called a TUPE agreement, affecting the transfer of people, because you have certain rights in terms of your transfer. If there's a job here that matches your job more than 60 or 70%, then you should naturally fill into it without having to go to an interview. So strategies like that we introduce, and to make sure that then those people continue to exist, and the agenda and the politics of the Greater London Council continues in that successor authority. So it was called the London Strategic Policy Unit, LSPU, and that was the main strategic successor authority of the GLC. 9 local authorities, Labour local authorities, contributed to that, to the money for that, plus the money that we transferred on to them. And under that LSPU banner became these specialist units: the Women's Unit, the Race Unit, the Police Unit, Economic Development.
And then what was it like that day, that last day of the existence?
Funny enough, I can't remember that last day. It must have been quite an incredible day, because we were always celebrating things. And as a staff, we gelled. In adversity, we really got closer to each other and supported each other. And but for me, what I do remember is after work was also after work. Like it continued like we were still at work. There's camaraderie that existed among people, because we were struggling and developing things that we all believed in and wanted to do. So that created a bond for people to liaise with outside. And I know within our unit, up to this day, we still meet from time to time to go out and have a meal and to recreate that. I know certain groups in finance, for example, or housing, they still meet. The GLC groups of people on the different departments, they still meet all over London.
And was there an overall community that was created by the GLC with activists or officers and employees?
Certainly among the minority units and the race, police and so on, we all related to each other, especially if there were black people as employees or all that. We had a good relationship with the women's unit, because race and women were the two major dynamic there. And within us we had policy officers for refugees and gypsies and travellers and so on. So all of that enabled us to be fully representative of quite all the constituent elements of the society. So therefore we could quite related to each other very, very positively. So there was a nice feeling about that. Yes, there were conflicts, there were issues around who will get the biggest share of the cake. Is gender more important than race? Is race more important than class? And that sort of thing. You had those discussions, you had those approaches, and then because each unit had a different committee head, so our unit was headed by Ken, and that was in our favour, because the leader headed race, because we felt race was most important in terms of dynamic. The women's unit was headed by another woman who wasn't the leader, and therefore perhaps was seen as less accessible to getting the resources that are necessary for the women's unit.
Who sticks out in your mind the most from that era in terms of people that you worked with? Which prominent figures?
Well, I worked very closely with Paul Botting, who became Lord Botting, and he was very, very supportive of us. And then there was Linda Bellis, who became our chair in the successor authority after abolition, and she and Narendra Mackenzie, who was a supporter from Haringey. Those were the key people who really provided us, as officers, gave us the support to do things, and to do things with impunity, to understand, and to do things that knowing that our backs are covered. So Bernard Wiltshire from the London Education Authority, also as part of that authority, was enabling us to do things. If you had that kind of political support dotted around the council with black officers, that was useful. And then the opportunity, because we knew we brought in this idea of still linking to the community. So people would come in to visit us from the community. County Hall, yes, was an imposing building. For security reasons, not everybody can come in. But people felt that this is a community initiative and people can come in anytime just come into the offices and meet, sit down and chat. And we generated that kind of ambience where people can feel that this is not a local government building that's foreboding. You can't access, you can't go in without an appointment, you have to go through all kind of security measures. There has been an element of that because of it's a public building and so on. But once you got in there, the ambience of the unit was very much embracing, inclusive.
And what was the relationship like to the other institutions, like, for example, the local councils?
We worked with the local councils in some respects, and particularly the labour-controlled ones. With the others, there was a good relationship, not a relationship, because they accepted the fact that we are officers. Some people knew that we were officers with a political agenda, but in the main, we were able to relate very closely with the key officers in those individual boroughs. So, for example, in Hackney, there would be a race advisor. So that race advisor would work very closely with us. He would come to our meetings, we would go to the meetings, we would support each other, we would sit down and strategize. So each of the key elements or key boroughs would have race advisors, and those race advisors were natural allies to us in the Greater London Council and were our point of entry to that particular local authority. So that was very useful in enabling us to have a good working relationship with that particular local authority.
And that would have been, so Hackney at that time would have been Labour?
Yes, yeah. Hackney is just one example, but there were lots of others, yes.
And what was the relationship like between the GLC and the Conservative councils?
In some instances, it was a healthy skepticism about what we can do, and we knew the limitations in terms of trying to deal with them. But we always tried to have a very professional approach to that. We knew that there was no way we would get certain concessions or certain support for particular policies or particular programs or events. But we felt that still we need to work with those individual local authorities. And there were individual members who were very supportive, didn't agree with everything that we did or wanted to do, but nevertheless felt that they could give us support as professionals. And I think we enjoyed generally a good working relationship with those local authorities. I'm trying to think of anyone where there was a total absence, and I can't think of any local authority where we had any major problem of non-engagement or non-compliance.
And what about the relationship with broader movements, social movements across the city, like networks of activists?
With political organizations and with community organizations, some of those who are in receipt of funding obviously had a very positive attitude towards us. There were others who felt the politics was such that we were just window dressing as black people in there, and therefore we weren't really representative of the black community, and we weren't doing anything of value to the black community. In fact, we were very much traitors and can't be trusted. So there was that element, particularly for the radical black left there. And I understand that because I was part of that. When I left the building, I was part of that radical black left and articulated in some of that as well. So I understood that. And so the relationship was very touchy with those organizations, and they were very critical of us. But it was important for us to understand where they were coming from and to take that on board. But it sometimes hurt when you were told in public that you're a traitor to the black race and you shouldn't be doing certain things. Yeah. But we believed in what we were doing, and we believed, yes, there was an element of paper in the cracks. There was element of just doing things in a showy manner, just a pure presentation as opposed to substance and structural change. But we knew that. But the important thing was the message that was getting across, that equality matters, that blacks were here to stay, and therefore you had to deal with us.
And do you think that the attitude of the radical black left was limited to that section of people? How did that compare with public perception or community perception?
I think generally, either because we were linking particularly with certain elements of the community, but there were lots of support from communities, because you've got to acknowledge that for the first time, many of those communities had no access to power, no access to resources. And here they found an organization that was receptive to their needs, receptive to what they have to say. So we had a lot of consultation was an essential element of our work. We consulted and we had discussions, we had seminars, we had conferences regularly with all different constituencies. So we always invited people to come and tell us what we want in the local authority. So right across the board, us and our staff had these meetings and these consultations, and all our programs was revolved around that. So we reached out to those communities in a quite structured and deliberate way. So from that point of view, the negative comments that came from the radical left was very much to the extreme left. Most people were quite willing to accommodate us and to embrace us, but not necessarily fully support us.
And just moving on now to talking about the legacy. What do you think the legacy of the GLC was for you personally?
For me, it gave me an opportunity to build on a platform in terms of my own career development and understanding. It gave me an opportunity to understand how political power operates at the highest level. It gave me an opportunity to engage with different communities that I would not have been able to engage with if I was just an ordinary person. The insights I gained working with the travelers, the insights I gained working with the Jewish community, the insights I gained working with the gay and lesbian community were valuable insights for me personally that I would not have had an opportunity to do except in a very cursory way with those communities. But directly engage with them, meeting them, discussing them, providing opportunities for development and so on, enabled me to be a better person and to understand how inclusivity is important and diversity is important to development. Yeah. So that was the one thing I felt I gained out of my experience at the GLC.
And what about the communities that the GLC engaged with? What do you think the legacy was for them?
For many it was resources. For many it was money to do things. For many it was an opportunity to get a lease on a building. For many it was an entry into political power, because some of those people who got involved, they became local councillors because they felt that they could see elements of where they can be effective in delivering support. So those were the very positive outcomes for many people who were as community representatives or as communities engaged with the GLC.
What do you think London would look like today if the GLC had continued its work?
If we have a GLC different from what we have presently now, which is the Greater London Authority, I think we would have needed to be invested with far more powers. So I think we should have had powers to deal with health and the local NHS. We should have had powers to deal with the aspects of developing London, planning, building on different sites. And I think if the GLC had continued and there was support at central government level, there would have been a greater devolving of powers to the GLC. On the other hand, it could have been the opposite way. Every more powers would be taken back centrally, and the GLC would have just been a window dressing aspect. But I think the way politics went, where people wanted to be locally involved in what is happening in their communities, it would have been very difficult for any government not to devolve more powers to its strategic authorities in the way in which they've done it with Wales and Scotland. So London, I think, would have kind of easily become part of that process.
Do you think the GLC could have continued in that way under a Conservative government? or was abolition inevitable?
I think the drive towards devolving powers is so strong that either party or all parties would find it difficult to stop it. Yeah, you'll be able to slow it down, but in the end, it would have to happen. Yeah, purely because, as well, that taking things in centrally and as doing everything centrally just goes against every basic principles of unity and participation and engagement. We all know that we've got to get people to be committed, and if you get them to committed, they have to feel as part and parcel of the process, both in terms of decision and delivery.
And what was the relationship like with central government?
Very little I had to do in terms of central government, except when we met with the odd senior minister or senior civil servant in particular departments. But I'm trying to think, very little I can remember of any direct engagement with central government, except around certain aspects where we felt that we provided some support or they wanted us to be involved and engaged. Off the top of my head, I remember the issue around public appointments, when we were saying, as a GLC, we were saying that all these public appointments were being made to boards and quangos, and there were very few black people. And I know you were instrumental in trying to get those senior civil servants to try and change that, so that they're far more open to create a more diverse governing body for these appointments. Yeah.
And what do you think the legacy is of the GLC on London as a city? Its cityscape, if you like.
I think, its attitude towards green open spaces I think was very commendable. And were it not for the GLC, we may have lost far more green sites and brown sites and more building of houses. And that's something that we're facing up to today now. I think there certainly is a need for a strategic authority, and I think there's a recognition that also with the creation of the great GLA, that in the end is a version of the GLC, so that the GLC certainly has established the need for that strategic approach towards planning and towards development. I think London would have been better, I think, definitely, with a good left-wing authority in that strategic position. Yeah.
A lot of people from my generation are really not familiar with the GLC story. This is why this project exists to an extent. What are your reflections on that kind of forgetting of the GLC?
Well, like everything else, I think the contributions made by people, the contribution made by institutions and organizations are soon lost if we are not captured, archived and celebrated. So just in the way in which individual members of the black community who have intervened and struggled and participated and created changes can well be lost for their individual contributions to that, because we haven't archived their contributions, we have not acknowledged their contributions, we have not celebrated it, we have not put it anywhere in any digital forms or archival forms or anything like that. So too with the GLC, in the sense that, all right, all the documentations are in the archives, but with anybody little access to it wouldn't appreciate and understand the context in which some of these things happen. And I think this is where your project is particularly important, because it's, for the first time, like anything else, it will begin to place whatever happened there within a very important context that people can understand and be able to access and be able to reach as and when necessary. So we have to begin to acknowledge what everybody did, what those organizations did, what each local authority did. And each little bit have nuances and developments that are as instructive and illustrative as any other strategic level. So within each individual department, there are little stories, there are little vignettes that we can talk about that's very, very useful. And we have that as well within the Race Equality Unit. Our relationships with black artists, for example, the extent to which we had to go through to manipulate local authority legal elements to bring somebody from abroad, purely because there are limitations on how much we can pay for flight. So there's those little struggles, those tiny little struggles, and there's also the far bigger struggles over our relationship with the IRA and so on. That also instructive in what happened at the GLC, because Ken had that radical element. We did have a relationship with Sinn Féin. We did have a relationship with the IRA, and those elements need to be also explored.
And sort of final question: how do you envisage this exploration and this project and going back into the GLC history changing the direction of London in the future?
Well, for me, on a very personal level, it forces me to rethink. I haven't done this before since leaving the GLC. You look back on it as a period of your experience, part of the CV, part of the opportunities you came from. But we need to have that reflective moment. And I think we need to have that reflective moment with others as well. Because, again, you bring it to your own perspectives. And sometimes that perspective is very narrow in its interpretation. And I accept that and acknowledge that. And as you get older, the memory fades. And sometimes the contextual elements within that recollection is lost. And I think you can triangulate that assessment of those things by sitting down with somebody else, 2 or 3 other people, and comparing notes, comparing experiences. And for me, that's the important thing. So you can capture an individual, and I think perhaps what might be the next step is to bring 3 or 4 of those individuals together to then test the accuracy of that interpretation and to see where it came from. Because I could tell you, we may shift allegiances and shift interpretations when you hear somebody else's recollections, which sometimes helps to reformulate your own recollections, and then you get a far truer picture of what exactly happened.